It's late. I'm not going to keep this long. When real men can't sleep, real men do the news. Typically, I'm up at 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. I will be there. Well, it's not tomorrow. It'll be later in the morning. I have a full show for tomorrow. But there are a few topics that I wanted to hit that annoyed me deeply, especially this particular one, because I feel like it's cleaning house on some level. And they may not be able to get to them tomorrow during the show because tomorrow's going to be a full show. AOC has been a big disappointment, a deep and abiding disappointment, especially from the standpoint of how she got into politics. If you remember, AOC was the one who said we need to primary some folks. She was the disruptor, the ultimate disruptor. That is the name for herself that she set when she first got into Congress. But over the years, she seemed to have gotten her mind right, and she's enfolded herself into the Democratic machine and into the Democratic Party itself. And despite the fact, after this loss to Donald Trump, where she seemed to try to distance herself from the Democratic Party, as I pointed out on Twitter, you are wed to that party. This is not a situation where you are separate and distinct. You are one of them. You are right there, arm in arm with Mama Bear, in one situation after the next, specifically on the issue of Gaza. Before AOC got into Congress, she was very strident on this issue. She would talk about it as an occupation. She would talk about it as an apartheid state. And then I saw her on a show where she was directly asked this question with an interviewer. It's the show that William F. Buckley used to run. But the interviewer directly pointed her and said, wait a minute, you said apartheid. In which case, she stopped and fundamentally unraveled. And that's what I knew right there, right there. This is not a person that is going to hold their shape or hold the line on issues that are fraught with controversy, specifically this issue. On a day when we find out that kids are being starved to death in Gaza, this right now is Gaza. This is what we're talking about. It's shocking that there's anything else to kill, considering the place has been fundamentally flattened. No food is getting in. And even when the US put out that fig leaf of a canard for the election to try to help out Kamala Harris, saying humanitarian relief needs to be delivered or else. Well, nobody gave the or else any mind. And when he got down to the 30 days, they asked the State Department, and the State Department just said, well, we're not going to get into the details of logistics, despite the fact that they're the ones who set the details for those logistics that they required. The place has been utterly and entirely destroyed. All right. On the same day, where we find out that Israel, carrying on with their course of genocide and ethnic cleansing, has killed 88 Palestinians by leveling a neighborhood near a hospital. On the same day, where Seymour Hersh releases that Israel is planning to formally and illegally annex the West Bank, effectively just steal it. They've been ethnically cleansing Gaza. They've been preparing for this ethnic cleansing of the West Bank. And I want to pat myself on the back here because I pointed this out months ago. They are trying to create Greater Israel. They are stealing that territory. And finally, someone else points out, hey, you're right. That's exactly what they're trying to do. Miriam Adelson, if you remember, gave Donald Trump apparently $100 million. Well, apparently he didn't get the entire check for $100 million, but apparently he got $30 million. But what she wanted was this annexation of the West Bank. And Israel believes that Donald Trump would deliver. And the reality of it is, they wouldn't even need Donald Trump for that. Because do you honestly believe, given what you've seen over the course of the year, that Joe Biden would intercede on this issue? He has given Israel a blank check. And I would wager to you that blank check would extend to the West Bank also. But Trump gets in, they believe he's going to give them exactly what they want, in this case, the West Bank. So now they are taking movements after creating facts on the ground to just annex it outright. On this same day, Sanders is in the well of Congress doing what Sanders does. And he is advocating on this issue to stop the weapon shipments, basically to block a $20 billion bill that the White House is doubling down on in order to send to Israel. His point is, this is obviously a genocide. They are obviously starving those people. Even our own institutions indicated that Israel was intentionally starving the Palestinians. And just to make this point, open a final point on it, if the United States didn't believe that Israel was starving the Palestinians, why would they have to put out this kind of order? Either you allow the trucks in or else you don't get weapons. If indeed they were already providing the food in the way that the US claim they were doing, why would you ever need to put out that edict? And the reality of it is we are ignoring our own laws in this situation because we are not supposed to be given the weapons anyway if they are committing war crimes, or for that matter, starving the population, meaning not handing out the humanitarian supplies as they're being delivered. Sanders comes out and he calls for an end to the $20 billion that they're supposed to get, basically block the money, the guns, etc.
I've heard members of the U.S. Senate come to this floor to denounce human rights violations taking place around the world. I've heard well-founded concerns about China's brutal reception of the Uyghur ethnic minority. I've heard rightful outrage about Putin's brutal attacks against Ukraine and bombing of civilian installations. I've heard genuine concern about Iran's outrageous crackdown on peaceful protesters. I've heard repeated condemnations of Saudi Arabia's terrible treatment of women and political dissidents. And on it goes. A lot of folks come to the floor to talk about human rights and what's going on around the world. But what I want to say to all those folks, nobody is going to take anything you say with a grain of seriousness. You cannot condemn human rights around the world and then turn a blind eye to what the United States government is now funding in Israel. People will laugh in your face. They will say to you, you're concerned about China, you're concerned about Russia, you're concerned about Iran. Well, why are you funding the starvation of children in Gaza right now?
To put this in perspective, 70% or more of the bullets, the guns, the missiles, the intelligence of the entire bloody escapade, meaning the rivers of blood that are being created in Israel, we have paid more than 70% of it. It is impossible to be taking place without us and our support. That's Sanders' point. You are going around the world talking about the Uyghurs, you're talking about the Russians, you're talking about all of these other people, and yet you are literally funding and giving diplomatic cover for a full-bore genocide. That is what we are doing. How are you going to have any credibility at all on this issue of human rights? We have destroyed our institutions in order to give Israel a blank check to do what it's doing. All right. On this same day, AOC sees what Sanders is doing and on Twitter says this: "Thank you, Senator Sanders, for leading the effort to block further offensive weapons to the Israeli government, and to every one of these 18 senators for affirming that the United States must uphold its own laws and commitment to international human rights." Okay, so it seems like she's applauding Sanders for this. And the 18 senators that agreed with Sanders. This is the list of all the senators that voted with Sanders. Obviously, it failed because they only got 18 people with a conscience in the Senate. All right, so it seems like AOC is on board. Also taking place on the same day is H.R. 1449 in the House of Representatives. This resolution conflates criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. It was understood to do that. Cori Bush, because of that fact, voted against it. I condemn anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred and bigotry, period. HR Resolution 1449 relies on the flawed IHRA definition, conflating valid criticism of the government of Israel with anti-Semitism. Standing up against hate must never come at the cost of silencing valid and necessary critiques. And considering Israel has just murdered more than 20,000 babies or kids, I think criticism is warranted, especially since the objective is to create this greater Israel and to starve, exterminate, or expel the population of northern Gaza, and for that matter, to do the exact same thing in southern Lebanon. Come to find out, this passes 388 to 21. When you look a little bit into it, guess who also voted for it? AOC. AOC. So, while hundreds of people are being killed today, while babies are starving to death today, meaning this is something that's known, we can see it with our own eyes. While you have the situation of the West Bank, or it being announced that the West Bank is going to be annexed formally by the Israeli government, while Sanders is fighting in the well of Congress saying we shouldn't send weapon shipments, and while AOC comes out, I agree with you on that, Sanders, great job. Silently, she is making her vote in order to conflate the definition of anti-Semitism with valid criticism of Israel, meaning calling someone a Zionist or going after the government of Israel for literally committing a genocide would be added to anti-Semitism, or it could be added to anti-Semitism. And AOC voted for that. AOC voted for that. Cori Bush understood what it was. Why didn't AOC understand what it was? To make this even worse, on the exact same day that this is taking place, you get the U.S. vetoing a draft resolution for a ceasefire, a permanent, lasting, unconditional ceasefire in Gaza. Every last state in the UN Security Council voted for it, with the exception of America. Put that in context. When I say we are paying money, when I say we are giving money for bullets, guns, weapons, all of that stuff. But if you notice, I always add diplomatic cover. Because fact of the matter is, again, Israel couldn't do what it does without the U.S. providing the money in order to pay for it, but also the diplomatic cover to allow it to continue and propagate. That diplomatic cover comes in a form, in this case, of this goofball who's sitting here looking crazy, raising his hand for genocide and continuing a genocide. I want you to hear what he had to say, because what he says here is completely laughable. And when Sanders points out we lose all credibility in this process, this guy is the epitome of that credibility loss. I want you to hear him. You're a representative. In this particular day, anyway, usually it's the black woman Greenfield, but you're a representative. in the UN Security Council.
The United States also, over the course of the past year, has done more than any other country to take tangible steps to improve the humanitarian conditions in Gaza, even as the situation remains dire. We have also done more than anyone to work with the government of Israel in an effort to minimize civilian harm over the course of the conflict. The United States also, over the course of...
Think about that. We have done more than anyone to minimize the harm in this conflict. Joe Biden could have stopped the weapons. He could have stopped the money. He could have pulled diplomatic support. He could have passed sanctions. We literally are paying for it. And yet he's making the argument, well, we've done everything that we possibly could. You didn't stop the guns, didn't stop the money, didn't stop the weapons, didn't stop any of that stuff, didn't pass sanctions, didn't go into the UN Security Council and vote for a ceasefire. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because all of this happened on the exact same day the AOC voted with the Democratic Party to conflate anti-Semitism with valid criticism of Israel. That's the point that I'm making. Do you remember when AOC got on stage before the election and said this?
Kamala Harris, we have a chance to elect a president who is for the middle class because she is from the middle class. She understands the urgency of rent checks and groceries and prescriptions. She is as committed to our reproductive and civil rights as she is to taking on corporate greed. And she is working tirelessly to secure a ceasefire in Gaza and bringing hostages home.
Is she really doing that? Is she really doing that? I mean, again, you can stop the weapons, you can pass sanctions, you can stop the guns, you can stop the money, you can stop any of those things. And all of those things are fundamentally necessary in order to keep this genocide going. It is a clear genocide at this point. It is clear that they're starving them at this point. It is clear they're bombing hospitals, schools. They are completely making the place unlivable as policy. AOC gets up there and says something that is fundamentally a lie, purely for the Democratic Party, knowing full well that Joe Biden, or for that matter, Kamala Harris, could have done something radically different all the way through and chose not to for their own political ambitions, or for that matter, the geopolitical position of Israel. She lied for the party. She lied for the party. And again, what I'm getting at is she argued that they're working tirelessly when the United States, when it came down to a vote, when Joe Biden could have told him, hey, allow it to go through, instead sent him down there in order to raise his hand to say, we affirm genocide. We, the United States, believe in this. This is what we affirm. They're not working tirelessly for anything. That's my point. And she's out here posing for the Democratic Party while stabbing this group, the people who want to criticize, the people who have a conscience, in the back through legislation. That it's clear what it represents, meaning this conflation of legitimate criticism of a genocidal state with anti-Semitism. One last point. The Biden administration is doubling down on this. Apparently, the Biden administration is preparing to shame and to say that anybody that is not supporting sending Israel a bunch of money as they committed genocide is working with Hamas. So they are doubling down even after losing the election, meaning they have nothing to lose. The election is over with, and this is still their policy. This is still their policy. I wonder, does AOC still believe that they are working tirelessly for a ceasefire? Does she still believe that? that she still believes that. And to make this even worse, we have destroyed, fundamentally destroyed, all of the institutions that we have built in order to protect Israel and cover Israel. And by the way, we're not covering them from a moral or an ethical, or for that matter, even a propagandistic sense. Well, we can't do that. We don't have the power to do that. They are a world pariah, and the world sees them for what they are. What we can do, though, is prevent UN Security Council resolutions from going through. But if you remember, when the UN Security Council resolution did go through, do you remember what they said? They came out and the US government said this, which is just astonishing and outrageous. This is psychopath or sociopath Matthew Miller. Listen to what sociopath has to say.
The UN resolution, a Security Council UN resolution, not non-binding, because that's a significant shift. That's not the understanding of most countries, and it's not the understanding of the UN either. This is not a Chapter 7 resolution, so I don't get how the US is now saying that it would be non-binding and basically giving the message that another country wouldn't necessarily need to comply with it.
So let me explain what we meant by that. First of all, as we said yesterday, and we've made clear all along, we have always believed that the path to a ceasefire and the release of hostages is something that will be reached through negotiations between Israel and Hamas, enabled by third-party countries and in which the United States is participating, and not through a UN process, and that remains our belief. When we
What he's arguing here is rather astonishing. The UN Security Council passes a resolution calling for a ceasefire, and this is after multiple iterations of this. At the end of that, you would expect, okay, this is a UN Security Council resolution. This is a binding resolution, and it demands that this ceasefire is implemented. The US immediately comes out and says, you don't have to follow that, Israel. We don't really care about this. We consider this non-binding. The UN Security Council doesn't pass non-binding resolutions. But in this case, they basically blown off the UN Security Council in order to protect Israel, meaning they wanted it in the books that, hey, we were doing something for the ceasefire, while simultaneously, in actuality, in experiential reality, undercutting that same UN Security Council. It's just outrageous, completely outrageous. AOC should have known better than signing her name to that particular piece of legislation. And to do that, meaning to undercut the capability of criticizing a genocidal government while simultaneously applauding someone who's doing that, is just outrageous. It's posing at its highest. Do better. Do better. Like, share, and subscribe. Concerned citizen AOC, another obvious con. Well, in this case, on this issue, she is somebody who apparently cannot hold her shape. It is outrageous that you are, in one sense, trying to pat somebody on the back who's in the well of Congress fighting to block this legislation, while simultaneously passing legislation and lumping yourself into the legislation that will make it harder to criticize a genocidal government. Shame on you, AOC. Like, share, and subscribe.